Ellen, I am so grateful to have you in this video cast, and Resultant as a whole is very thankful to you because you are a woman of tremendous expertise and experience, and you bring such a wealth of insights related to all things risk management, data, etc. So for the purpose of our audience really understanding the context of what you're going to be sharing with us, give us some background that will educate them as to how you came to be the person that you are today in your practice.
Well, thank you so much, Paola, for having me here, and to Resultant for wanting to do this podcast. I'm very flattered to be a part of it and to be here with you today. So thank you. In terms of my career, I actually have an agricultural economics background from Purdue. I worked in the chemical industry for Fortune 50 and decided that I needed to be an entrepreneur instead. My first venture didn't quite make it. I could have gone back to chemicals, but I decided to move to DC, where I literally temped my way into risk management at Georgetown University, where they were starting their first program. And I became the secretary, and I have a great admiration for secretaries, but it wasn't my aspiration. And I told my boss I would stay until I got a real job. 10 years later, I became director of risk at the University of Denver, having had many, many great opportunities at Georgetown to include claims management, setting up databases, so really understanding the need for good, solid data, conducting loss prevention, and also implementing their first business continuity program as project manager for Y2K. When I went to Denver, they asked me to implement business continuity post Y2K. And then I focused quite a bit on risk finance, where we were able to really embolden a risk culture at the university and worked with all types of people at all levels. And then we were able to build quite a bit of a risk finance reserve to save for that, quote, rainy day if we needed it, or have options along the way with that. I also achieved getting my master's in finance at the time. And after that, I was looking for opportunities in the Oregon University system, decided to bring me in as their chief risk officer, as they were separating from the state of Oregon, and they wanted me to develop a brand new program from scratch. So the beauty in that opportunity, it was a bit like an M&A, where I was able to value the program, find out what our needs were. I had 7 public universities, including the Oregon Ducks from Eugene and the Beavers from Oregon State, and 7 schools across the state. And we pulled together a team, and they didn't know anything about risk. I didn't know anything about Oregon. And we learned from each other and established a $1 million self-insured program, $500,000 to start, and then $1 million later on, within 2 to 3 months for the casualty side. And then we took a few extra months for the property side, which had about $8.5 billion worth of property for that. From there, the state legislature decided to separate all of the universities into separate legal entities, in which case they required them also to stay within the risk program. And while I reviewed a lot of the risk associated bills that went to the House, I never saw that one until it was signed, and I wish they would have asked, because for anyone that knows insurance, you cannot have a self-insured program for multiple legal entities. So we had to, again, change and transition, and we built a private trust with public funds, about a $14 million program, and it still exists today. And it passed audit review early on. So that was a real great opportunity. Once we got through the split, I really worked my way out of a job, and after that was called by Southern Methodist University to come and take a look at their program. So I went to Dallas, where I am now, and it was a great opportunity working with things such as the Department of Homeland Security Safety Act to protect the George W. Bush Presidential Center. I had opportunity to lead the crisis management and EOC team, although the experts ran the EOC for sure, but I kept the ball going with training and regular integration with the teams. I also had the opportunity at that time, in addition to the risk program and the EHS, we also conducted environmental health and safety emergency ops, but I also had the opportunity to build a strategic enterprise risk program while there. And my boss and I both agreed that was the most fun, I think, that I had while I was there. And they gave me their blessing to take it out on the road. So we developed a program that was implemented within 5 months. And a year after that, we had a board report with 3 of the initiatives tracking quite well. And we set up a program that was nimble, and you'll hear that term later in this podcast. We set up a program that was cost effective and one that embedded the program elements within existing processes to the extent possible. And those 3 things really bode well in any program today. So after a few years there, I decided to take that on the road and become an independent consultant. And here I am today.
Fantastic. That is a great career, and spanning across so many different functions, even within university space. And it's fascinating to me how at the core of risk, strategic or operational, you still depend vastly on information, as well as, right, as the experience on the trends, and that information depends on good data at the end of the day. So being able to roll up that good, accurate, reliable data to the level of being able to make very key strategic moves as it pertains to risk, and risk not seen as something that stops anyone, but on the contrary, it helps them speed up the process, accelerate the delivery, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think I learned early on that having a proper database and maintaining those numbers on a regular interval, and then seeing what those numbers could do in terms of how they could help inform strategy. And also records retention. It's a huge issue on universities, and I won't share everything we've done with old records, but you have to maintain them in a very secure fashion. And alumni are depending on it. Your alumni and donors are some of your greatest treasures, not to mention your employees are your most valuable assets. So you really have to maintain their data and their information in a very secure manner. So having learned that very early on and being responsible for monthly reports to 6 vice presidents on their claims data was a great training ground. It was painful at times.
I bet. So Ellen, walk us through what you are most passionate about, that you've been thinking about for today. And also, if you can, give us a bit of an angle in this world of everything blowing up in AI, right? Strategic risk being so important. So that would be helpful as well for folks that are, first of all, wanting to understand risk in a more comprehensive and strategic way, and also how to position that for things to come in the space of what is for some folks not something so known. So we all know what AI does, but the nitty-gritty of it, and also how to quantify and qualify the risk as organizations adopt more and more.
Right. Well, if I look at what strategic risk is, it truly is looking at certainty versus confidence. And that is true no matter whether it's AI or good old-fashioned property or a trip and fall on a sidewalk. Risk is actually providing you with the confidence that you can, managing risk is about providing your entity with the confidence to manage whatever comes your way. And the principles remain the same. Risk management started in the 60s, 70s, 80s. We focused on loss control and cyber or Y2K issues. In the 90s, we focused a lot on risk finance, more risk control. 2000s, we had cybersecurity. And it continues to evolve and change. And I'm grateful that I've had the experience to work with all those things. And through each era, having the data to build on things such as an annual balance scorecard that we were required to do at University of Denver actually made us better, and it made us stand out with our underwriters. And so if you look at the data, not just universities, but any organization has troves and troves of data. And we've seen just at a high level in recent months with the aviation industry, some very good carriers commercially, but even at the federal level, we've seen concerns. And most recently, we don't know what's happening with train derailments, but
Yes.
that could just be weather. But we do know that having data and updating data is integral and has to be a strategic component of anything anyone does. I will reflect on a document from the Poole College of Management at North Carolina State, and they have a document called the North Carolina State Executive, executive response to top risks for 2023 through 2032. And in 2023, we see one of the top 10 noting digital transformation essentially. By 2032, it hits 4 of the top 10 elements. So board members are thinking about this, and it's appropriate for people who are in charge of the data, and that's everyone from tracking time in any department to tracking your metrics, your KPIs, your KPRs, and anything associated with making you a better function. As Peter Drucker said years ago, if you cannot count it, you cannot improve it. And having done that balanced scorecard for 12 years at one university and taken that on the road to others, I cannot say enough about how important that is. But your data has to be accurate, it has to be accessible, and it has to be managed by people who are impassioned by that as well.
And some might argue you are your data to some extent, your reputation, your competitive advantage, right? It just forms your identity to a large degree.
Right. And that goes back to what is strategic risk, for example. And I talked earlier about certainty and confidence. And Madeleine Albright, former Secretary of State, had said at a meeting in Denver one year that certainty is there, you know it's going to happen one way or the other. Confidence is having the knowledge and the preparation to be able to manage whatever is next. And so 10 years from now, there will be risks we haven't even thought about yet. But if you have your data and your IT infrastructure rolling and moving and changing appropriately, you will be able to manage it. If you do not, there will be disruption, and it will impact your, again, the people. The things that we try to protect are the people, the strategy, the reputation, the financial, the operations, the assets, and compliance goes along with all of that as well. With that, having a strategic program, some of the things we'll talk about today is why have a strategic risk program, and then the types of risk, and then the examples that we've touched base on as well. I will say that the things that I'm passionate about today really are just trying to get companies to recognize that it's important to have someone with a risk lens on or focus on your company at all times. Yeah. And that can be one of many roles. It can be a partial role depending on the bandwidth of the person. But in this day and age, having a strategic risk focus is extremely important. I've been most recently doing some work on training myself to be better equipped to hopefully participate in some board work down the road. And going to meetings with different groups, I see very well-positioned attorneys and auditors that when asked, what do we do as a board if we need, for example, a a legal advice in the midst of something going wrong, and they'll say get a lawyer, but at the same time, you should be addressing this on an annual basis with your renewal of insurance to make sure that the lawyer you will need at some point and the coverage you will need at some point, hopefully not, but likely will need at some point, are in sync, and that your insurer is not surprised by someone just giving them $1 million bill for a loss. So it's very important to have a person that is knowledgeable, or have a process that is knowledgeable about, one, identifying those risks, so hopefully you won't need that lawyer, but also knowing that you have the proper people in the pipeline if you need it, so that you can manage that risk.
Now, this is 101 business preparation, right? I mean, there's nothing super complicated. We always come back to prepare. It pays off to prepare.
Yeah. And again, the difference between confidence and certainty. Certainty, you know, the sun's going up and coming down. You may not see it every day, but you know it is. The rotations occur. The confidence is making sure you have that in place. The other thing too is sometimes people, if you're not conducting some sort of a strategic enterprise approach and integrating all the different, it smooths out the silos if you do this, but if you are not doing that, and you need that with data, if you have excellent data on the left hand and you have faulty data on the right hand, and you're trying to make a rocket, you're going to have a faulty rocket. So you really need to be able to make all of those pieces of data work and integrate. And likewise with risk, you need to be able to have a formula to identify the strategic risks that can impact you. If I were to define risk, it's a circumstance or an issue that could prohibit you or impact your strategy, quite frankly. And that includes opportunities. You may have a missed opportunity if you don't really follow your data and what is going on, scanning the horizon for different things. So it's very important to make sure that you have an integrated approach to managing that data, and that it is accurate and available to be able to utilize in trending. And it's got to be authentic as well. You know, the old saying in research, you can make data look however you want.
That's right.
But it's got to be authentic, because more and more people have access to everything you do.
From a risk perspective, from a strategic risk perspective, how do you sense when that data is really of high quality, other than relying on the folks that are telling you that from a data management or analysis or governance perspective? How do you know from that strategic risk, this is not really at the level that we need?
There's a little bit of confidence that is needed in terms of the data. And I have always known, because I've learned this way, and as I said, it was sometimes painful, but you have to understand, when you're providing data, you have to understand that somebody may have that wherewithal and that curiosity to come back and find out, where did you get it? How did you get it? Prove it and stand behind it. And if you can do that with a high level of confidence, then that data can be held reliable. If I can go back, you know, in risk, we may have 1,000 claims a year at an entity, but you have to go back and understand why so much of a percent is, you know, maybe 7 claim types, and we have to normalize all that data into certain claim types, and then be able to defend ourselves with underwriters or with legal from time to time, or lawsuits. So you have to be able to go back to the fine granule if you need to. And if you can do that, you can be pretty confident in your data. If you try to bluff, you'll be found out at some point. I know you can have a plug, a good old accounting plug, and those are needed from time to time to shore up the 75-cent discrepancy on a $3 million budget. But that's a rounding error. But if it comes to something more significant, you have to be able to back that up. And there is leeway if we look at the general accounting principles, generally acceptable accounting principles in GAAP. You can have something called material risk. So what is a material loss? That is going to be consistent with your risk appetite statement. So what can you afford, or what can you not afford to lose, or what is significant enough that it may impact your life safety, reputation, strategy, compliance, et cetera, and maybe it's a $10,000 issue and not $100,000 or $1 million issue. Those issues sometimes that are small can be the ones that cause the most reputation harm, and we have a lot of those examples. So
they also erode the resiliency, which is something so needed, right, for risk.
yes.
Yeah, it's that fuel that keeps it going.
Yes. In terms of resiliency, I would much rather be prepared for that instance or issue that never occurs than to have to manage it. Yeah. I always say that in risk, we're looking for the lowest number, while many of us report to the financial side of the house, and they're always looking for bigger numbers. Mm-hmm. So in risk, you don't always know what you prevented. And that's true with law enforcement, with safety, with crisis management. You don't always know. Yeah. But at the same time, if your long-term trending from your data, your accurate data, goes in and shows that you're trending downward, or you have a little hiccup here or there, that's good for resilience. And that data is key in being able to tell your story to, whether it's the media, whether it's your shareholders, or whether it's your students, faculty, staff. It doesn't have to be higher ed. It can be your customers, no matter where in the airline industry. You have to be able to say why we chose A versus B. The other thing about resilience, as a risk professional, I've talked to a lot of people, and so there's some good lawyer stories. I've learned a lot about legal from many great lawyers, and they've told me they've learned a little bit from me as well. But sometimes you'll get these handshake deals, which, oh, you've got insurance and we've got insurance, and so anything happens, we're okay. But I've got to tell you that I hate to use my insurance. So if someone else is in the wrong, I will, inappropriate with the risk culture of the entity I'm working with, we will fight for whatever is right to make it whole. But to just say you've got insurance and I've got insurance, you don't know the unknown that could cause an incident. And so if I know my numbers are good, I don't want those to be affected by someone doing something to cause us harm nefariously.
And using your insurance is expensive. Unlike what it's perceived, it's a very expensive path.
If we look at risk finance, I will tell you that you can estimate what your losses are going to be, and there's a lot of great actuaries that run very complex models, and they'll run 2 or 3 of them on your program. And I can tell you, in certain programs, we've been able to smooth out the risk budget because we budgeted for those expected losses based on the actuary. And from that, it saved me from, say, a predecessor that had to ask the finance people for an extra $500,000 at the end of the year. We knew what our costs were going to be. We were able to budget it. Anything we didn't use, we saved. If you had that bad year, you were able to have a little bucket to dig into. But you can smooth out those losses without so much uncertainty. Again, it's providing that confidence, and it builds your risk profile over time as well. And that, again, goes back to good data management.
That's right.
So it's interesting when we're looking at the principles of data versus risk governance. They're really very, very similar. The same with cybersecurity. When you're looking at the principles, you want effective leadership and background. You need a champion, and hopefully that champion at a VP level has the backing of the board. Most boards are taking a closer look at risk, particularly after, the COVID-19 that went on for 2 years. And honestly, it's changed the entire makeup of the workplace now. And whether that will remain or return to somewhat normal, the jury is still out. But the things that needed to be done before COVID still need to be done. And boards are starting to refocus back to those things that need to be accomplished from pre-COVID era. But you need to have programs, each program, whether it's data governance and integrating with strategic risk, you have to have people with diverse skills to be able to manage the process, to see the broad picture. I think data governance, as much as anything, data governance really has the opportunity to show the integration. And also something I've always been told I'm good at is taking many disparate elements and threading them together into one solid strategy and function. In this case,
powerful skill. Yes.
Absolutely. And you have that too. But it's imperative from the people who are leading your data governance to be able to understand that. Apples and oranges sometimes make something that we really need to address.
Yeah.
So the life cycle management of data, again, in 20, 30 years ago, we didn't have as many shredders running around. We managed data or didn't manage it at all. I cannot tell you how many offices I've cleaned out with 30 years of data.
Wow.
But it's important to make sure that you keep what you need to keep and that you are respectful and discard what's not needed appropriately to protect that information, particularly since Social Security numbers were on everything, even so much as 20 years ago. The requirements are business requirements for data management, and there's risk associated with it, so be careful how you manage it. And this goes from your infrastructure and your facilities. Property insurance is an area that I do have a passion for. I've worked with a lot of property, and I always said property doesn't lie, but property can be vulnerable. And with our ever-increasing reliance on AI and on automated systems, from HVACs to, if you're doing research or chemical work, you have fume hoods, anything like that, or fine art, you have humidity sensors, etc., that really need to be maintained 24/7. You have to have a reliance on that data. And how often you read it is up to you. The Internet of Things is providing us with nanosecond readings. But find out what works for you, what is appropriate for what you're trying to protect, and make sure it's protected appropriately. If not, you could harm, again, people with a fume hood failure. You could harm a $50 million painting with a humidity
My goodness, yes.
type issue. And I don't make these things up. I always used to think higher ed might be a little not as sophisticated as many of the other businesses out there. But when I started working at a national or global level with the Risk and Insurance Management Society, I found I was thinking of things like drones and AI and meta before many were, and we were using them. We had them.
How fascinating. Yeah.
But with strategic risk, you really want the same thing. You need the global view. You need diverse skills, cross-functional and integrated programs. You need someone who has great communication skills to be able to talk with the researcher, to the VPs, to the board members, and be able to understand concepts. And I call myself more of a generalist in many ways, unless it's risk. But you have to be able to understand the concepts and, again, thread those risks together from those disparate thoughts. But then you also need to focus on protection of those people, reputation, strategy, finance operations, compliance, and assets.
Now,
And the
Ellen,
process.
sorry,
Uh-huh.
you
Yeah.
just mentioned something so important in that a generalist category. Risk by nature requires that you know a little bit about everything, or you
Right.
simply cannot quantify and qualify it appropriately, much less be able to deal with it from a strategic point of view. Is that fair?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And I think one of the best skill sets you can have as a risk professional, and this would apply to data too, is being curious. What's out there?
Mm-hmm.
Where did this come from? How is it housed? How is it protected? And I'm a very curious person. So it's served me well. The risk process, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later, really comes down to something that's very similar in cyber and other areas, and that is also with data governance. Identify the risk, and you can do that through a variety of ways. Assess the risk. From the assessment, implement and design a treatment, in this case, the architecture that you would want to build in. And from there, assess the results, apply, improve it, tweak it, or discard it, but assess the results, and that's the data you get from it, and then continue the life cycle management of the risk. So it's very similar.
The key risk indicators that so few folks are familiar with, because we've all heard about the KPIs, but key risk indicators seem to stumble folks, and they say, well, isn't that the same as performance? And not quite. There are triggers along the way. Could you
Right.
expound a little bit more on risk indicators for our audience?
I've probably done more of this on a more casual level, although I do have some components in my program that do formalize these key risk indicators. And that could be anything from, and I hope I'm setting this straight, but risk indicators, for example, are frequency of losses. So in workers' comp, if you have a lot of people, and I can say, having worked in a hospital environment when Georgetown in their hospital, needle sticks for any group of incoming resident interns, you have a lot of needle sticks to start, but bad things can be around needle sticks. So yeah, you have to take a look at that and then improve not only the devices, but improve the way that they're being used. So again, that data, the key risk indicator, and the data associated with that is extremely important in managing how your program is going and how effective it can be. You can look at almost any type of risk. Let's look at property again. If you have poor construction, new construction, or lack of punch list item type construction, lack of safety in your construction or renovation programs, someone will inevitably leave a say a sprinkler pipe valve closed, or leave a sprinkler taped so that it wouldn't receive paint on it. And then when you have the fire, the building goes down. Or you have hot work, which is welding in a vulnerable situation, an old building, and there should be a 3 to 4 hour fire watch on every hot work. And there are ways to do that when people are around. But if you're doing a torch at the end of the day and you leave, and you're in a 150-year-old building and you wonder why it goes up in flames an hour later, it's because sparks were still flying. So there are known risks, and there are ways to indicate, are we getting near this or not near this? And a lot of it is in the data that you collect, or in known programs that can improve your potential to mitigate that risk over time. Does that answer your question?
It does. I mean, my mind goes towards the amount of proper IoT data that you would need to have and right calculations to be able to calibrate to the right level of a trigger of risk, so that it's not overlooked if it's too many false positives, let's say, bringing up that trigger, or too few. That takes a lot of decision making and experience. You can't just leave that to the analyst. It's the
Right.
combination of on the ground experience of the craft plus being able to put it into place. So strategically, I'm thinking that the risk operation or the operationalization of strategic risk forces the business and the technology members to come together much more strongly than just those that have projects for the purpose of building requirements and delivering on that.
Right.
That calibration takes even longer, I would think, than the requirements. Is that fair
Yes.
to say?
It is absolutely fair. And I think of the agricultural industry where I have actually a family farm. It's my family's, not mine, but we farm, my brother's farm over 2,500 acres. And you have to be able to go from soils that are quite sandy and drain to soils that have more organic matter in them and hold water more. And so there are all kinds of IoT items out there that are either sensors being placed in the ground or other data being utilized from an airborne manner in order to help you apply proper fertilizer. And this is environmentally sound as well. But these types of things can help farmers regulate their crops better and be able to get better food to the table, which is becoming a big concern, whether or not we have
Right.
proper items. So, and enough food. And I believe there's plenty of farmland to go around to continue to make this, to make appropriate food for us. But if you apply it to just that area, for one thing, you can see the different ways in which data can help provide a safer and more sound, environmentally safe food supply.
And I think the definition of that is also up to discussion or up to debate, right?
I'm sure.
Risky in itself.
It is. And there are so many things with IoT. I could talk all day about IoT. I had the pleasure of working with a firm here in Dallas to provide and design, really create use case studies, and working with some insurance people and then also education research labs. We were able to provide a couple of use case studies, but then seeing what other people are doing as well. For example, and this is public now, but you're seeing contact lenses being used with IoT so they can monitor your biofluids. And they can help identify things such as diabetes or macular degeneration and other things within your body. The healthcare and biometric or biology-driven items that are coming forth are just incredible.
That
We
is,
may,
yeah. Now
and
that
all of it
ties
driven by
into
that.
ethics, right? So from a strategic risk perspective, that whole interweaving with the right level of digital ethics risk that you wish to take along the way as governance gets put in place and laws go into effect, but innovation goes ahead of all of that. And that's
Yes.
always tricky.
Disruptive innovation is one of the top risks for 2032, according to the Poole College of Management. And if we look at things such as Meta, I did a short discussion, introduction type of introduction session on Meta, the metaverse, about a year ago. And there's a group in DC called the SR Association, and they are looking at all things Meta because Meta will be used for training.
Yes.
Imagine with being able to train students and people in high risk areas, or not so high risk, but high risk areas in particular, on how to do that needle stick properly, or how to perform certain functions in surgery, etc., using 3D versus actual cadavers or other methodologies. With that, particularly when you look at the biometrics for security, for example, eye scans, thumbprints on everything, you're really giving up your most precious identifying marks. And who has that data? How is it being transformed? The born digital people in our society now are so used to providing those things. I don't think they think as much about security of their private information. And with the advent of TikTok and other things, they're throwing everything out. And it's a shame, because they may look back someday and wonder, what have I done? But how do we protect that for ourselves? Because more and more of it, whether it's a lock to your door, your front door, or your car, or your bank, if you've got the thumbprint or the eye scan, it's theirs.
Yeah.
They own that. And so who in your world manages that? And ethically, the compliance and ethics, there's a Society for Corporate Compliance and Ethics that attempts to work at that, and the Compliance Alliance for Corporate also that looks at those things.
And what does the board do? How does the board handle this with all of the changes? Do you find them adaptable? Do you find them struggling?
I am surprised sometimes. I know I'm learning from a wealth of knowledge within the people who are in these board groups, and these are sort of associations for people who are on boards. And as I said, it's more of an aspiration for mine right now. But a lot of these people are there because they love entrepreneurship. They love helping people grow their businesses or their opportunities, and they may have a passion for the product that is occurring, again, whether it's in aviation, retail, and they want to see the next thing. They're curious. So does that mean they've had an eye on risk or data? Neither one of those things are exactly the first thing you think about when you think of, oh, let's go shopping, or let's fly to the Bahamas or something. You're not thinking about where's my data going and what's the risk. Those are not the first thing you're going to pick up. So have the board members had as much experience in that? And that's where I think people with the skill set that we bring from a risk standpoint can help open the eyes a little bit for that. And in data too, you can open the eyes in terms of your board saying that, one data leak, one data loss could mean a $1 billion charge or loss of some type. And what would the cure have been? Could you have upgraded your technology, for example, for $500 million rather than spend 800 to $1 billion on a claim? This is where I don't like to use insurance. I'd rather take the money and put preventative measures in place first. So this is where boards, I think, need more training in risk. And stay tuned. I'm probably going to be helping a board group with some of that training, but it's not that we know it all, but we're curious, ask the right questions from an angle that maybe they've never had to deal with before. And they're smart people.
Right.
These board members, I have a great admiration for them. But if I can just help impart a little bit of curiosity on the risk side, then I've done my job.
Go a long way. Now, the risk registers are not enough. Is that fair to say?
They're a good start, but no, they're not enough. We have only to look at someone. There are so many higher ed examples that are very public. But if we look at something, if you make your risk program too mechanical, you will miss things, which is why the curiosity and the disparate objects coming together are quite meaningful. A risk register is a good starting point, and I would always suggest that groups take on a program where they identify risk through some sort of a survey, but ask your middle management. You don't need to ask 200 people. I've talked to a lot of risk managers. If you get 200 to 300 data points, you're probably going to get the same results, normalized data, as if you had 2,000 data points, because you'll narrow those down to about 15 risks, and from there narrow it down even further to maybe a top 10 and focus on a top 3 on a rotating basis, and then refresh your survey regularly. The fact is, a register is what people know today or what they knew yesterday. When you have something such as a pandemic come down the pipe, you have to be able to manage that on the run. Yeah. This is why you've got to keep nimble, but you still have to find ways to manage that fume hood, that runway, that data compliance issue. You can't let those slip. You have to multitask and manage the big issue. And you do that in a facilitated approach. Risk registers may miss something such as, and I hate to use this example, but Penn State did a couple of large risk registers, over 1,000 items were identified, and very good people on this, but no one thought to ask what Sandusky was doing in the locker room off hours. And that is the type of thing that you have to think of the unthinkable, or you have to think of what if and be curious and trust your instincts. Yeah, because more often than not, you're right.
You know, the trusting your instincts is really interesting, because I was reading from Gardner's Maverick research how important it is that they're bringing back the don't throw away your instincts, pair it with the data. And yes, I'm so glad to see that back. We're making like a full circle. As for so many years, we've said only the data, and that is what drives you. And now we're realizing that we're still missing some pieces, and there are certain things that require just that experience and that gut feeling when things are going south and the data is just not showing it to you yet. Yeah. So yeah, in the world of risk, that's important.
Right. That's one thing that I've had good instincts over the years, and even if I had something that didn't go so well, I likely had thought about it and didn't trust my instincts enough to address it appropriately. But at the same time, trusting my instincts has served me quite well over the years. If you're looking at the strategic risk, it's a good, again, a good formula to assess and just keep your program logical and reasonable. And then if you've got a group of people, and maybe you're the CEO or you're at the board level, but you have a group of people saying this is wrong, or we need help here, we need help here, the VP level, you've got to listen to it. Even if it doesn't make sense to you, find out why, drill down a little bit. Yeah. The other reason people don't use their instincts is they're afraid. They're afraid they'll be fired. And I've seen that in various groups before. And one of the most effective teams I ever worked with was with a group that basically said, we know from a crisis management standpoint that if anything happens, right, wrong, and different, we're going to allow people in the field to shut the place down if needed. You don't have to, as we saw with Virginia Tech, you don't have to wait 2 hours for the communications committee to meet. Mm-hmm. You need action within, today in a Twitter world, you need action within 15 minutes. And so you've got to trust people to do their job. And with that, you've got to give them confidence through preparation and training, going back to certainty and confidence. You have to give them that confidence, and that they won't lose their job if you have that bad day. Now, if they maliciously, with intent, tried to derail the response or tried to hide something, as we're seeing with a certain trial in South Carolina right now from a disparaged attorney, trying to do so many things to we'll see what happens with that. But if you're malicious in intent, then that's an HR issue, and that's within your contract. But if everyone's really trying to do the right thing, and they see that you're backing them up, you'll have 100% better risk culture than if you throw people under the bus on a regular basis. Yeah. So that's as important as the data. And then you'll get truer data.
Yes.
too. You'll get better data.
Yes.
But that you have to empower people. You have to, some of the key risk governance items with people are, start with the best practices, but make it fit your own DNA for your entity. And finding that DNA may be harder with people working from home.
It is harder, yes.
You have to really, this is actually one of the risks for 2023, but it will be for a long time. You have to have that confidence and then empower people to do their jobs. It's what we did in Oregon. We trained them. I showed them a Gantt chart and a dictionary of key terms the first day. We met every couple of weeks, communication, and they went from 0 to 100 in about 18 months so quickly, probably fewer, probably about a year. They were a great team to work with, and they're still doing great. Manage the KPRs, hold people accountable, provide the opportunity to succeed. This isn't about going in and trying to have a risk manager take over everything or a data manager. I've seen a lot of good risk managers try to put 100 risks on their shoulders, and it makes them a line manager. You want your line manager to be in charge of those KPRs and KPIs, and then be nimble. Be nimble and be prepared to move to that risk that was unexpected. But given your risk preparedness, know that you'll be able to manage it.
This is great, Ellen. You have really developed such a comprehensive yet pragmatic and wise approach. Those are the words that come up. It's all in a great box of tons of years of experience, but delivered with this nimble approach, adaptable, scalable, measured according to the DNA of the organization. Where can folks find you if they need your help?
They can find me at Ellen S. Holland at strategicriskframeworks.com, or look up Strategic Risk Frameworks as well. Ellen Shew Holland, my full name. And I also would like to just add that there are certain tools and things that you can work in. So I do partner with a UK firm that does strategic risk management called Iris Intelligence. And we've collaborated on building some of their product, and it, to me, it's the best product out there. And I know a little bit about those programs. So
yes, you do. That is fantastic. You have really blessed us with this time. We walk away enriched. I know the audience does too. So, folks, there's going to be all that information is going to be in the at the bottom of this video. And thank you so much for joining us, Ellen. What a treat. Thank you. Want you to come back. So please, with the latest, and especially with more as AI and crypto and digital banking, centralized banking, all of these things converge. So we look forward to hearing more from you. Thank you, Ellen.
Thank you so much. Thank you to Resultant as well.